June 4th, 1944. Dawn breaks over the cornfields of Harland, Iowa. Golden light spills across wet grass, while the sweet, thick scent of honey drifts from rows of beehives, standing like wooden sentinels beside a weathered barn. John Winslow Carson, 36 years old, stands among his buzzing army of bees, watching them dart in and out of their waxy kingdoms with almost military precision. He lifts a spoon from a jar, watching amber honey trail down in a slow, golden ribbon. His voice, roughened by years of tobacco and harsh Iowa winters, cuts through the morning air. "Sweetest thing in the world," he mutters. "But ain't nothing sweet about this war." Above him, the rumble of engines grows louder. Not tractors, not trucks. American bombers, massive flying fortresses headed for England, for Europe, for hell itself. John squints upward but doesn't wave. There's no one left to wave to. His brother Mark shipped out last winter, no letters in weeks. What John doesn't know, what he cannot possibly imagine as he stands there among his bees, is that within 72 hours, his stupid idea involving that very honey will help save a convoy of American trucks rolling through occupied France. They call him a fool, a nobody, just a farmer, until his trick with honey helps change the course of the war. John Winslow Carson was never meant to be a hero. Born in 1908, he inherited 160 acres of Iowa farmland from his father, along with an old barn, broken tractors, and a few dozen beehives shoved beneath an apple tree. By 1935, he had transformed that modest operation into something remarkable, managing over 200 colonies. That meant roughly 12 million bees under his care, producing up to 3,000 pounds of honey every season. Then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Everything changed overnight. Every person, every tool, every resource suddenly pulled into the orbit of global conflict. John watched neighbors' sons leave for war. His own brother Mark enlisted. John was 33 with a bad knee from a farming accident. The military classification came back, 4F, unfit for service. That single letter haunted him like a ghost. While other men bled on foreign beaches, John was told to grow, to produce, to harvest. His weapon wasn't a rifle, it was a plow. But during the war's early years, sugar became desperately scarce. In 1942, the federal government rationed civilian sugar consumption to just 26 pounds per person per year, down from 100 before the war. Sugar was needed for everything from preserving food to manufacturing explosives. The military turned to honey. It was shelf-stable, energy-dense, naturally antimicrobial. It didn't spoil, didn't need refrigeration, and could be packed into small containers for frontline soldiers. The United States Army began searching for suppliers who could meet this growing demand. John's name appeared in a Department of Agriculture ledger in 1943 as a registered honey producer with surplus capacity. A letter arrived offering a small government contract, nothing glamorous. Just deliver 700 pounds of honey to a processing facility in Des Moines. It would be canned, labeled Army issue, and shipped to wherever American boys were fighting. At first, John didn't think much of it. He loaded the jars, filled out the paperwork, went back to tending his hives. But behind the scenes, something extraordinary was happening. Military engineers and medics had begun experimenting with honey in ways never tested on a large scale before. Honey could be used in field dressings for wounds thanks to its bacteria-killing properties. It could coat metal to prevent rust. Mixed with beeswax, it formed waterproof seals and could even quiet the creak of vehicle joints during stealth operations. By the end of 1943, John had expanded to 350 hives, over 20 million bees under his care, producing enough honey to fill a small freight car. Yet he remained convinced he was sitting on the sidelines, contributing nothing that mattered. He had no idea his quiet work in the heart of America would soon collide with one of the most audacious logistics experiments of the Second World War. By spring of 1944, John was producing close to 4,000 pounds of honey. But while honey flowed from his hives, frustration grew thicker with every shipment. The government never told him where the jars went. No acknowledgement, no thanks, no proof it was helping. He'd load barrels into army trucks that arrived with no faces, just gloved hands, clipped signatures, and the drone of engines disappearing over the hill. "Feels like throwing it into the ocean," he told a friend. His neighbors didn't help. "You still playing with bee juice?" one asked at church. "We're trying to win a war here." John's brother Mark had written in his last letter, dated December, "We're cold, wet, sometimes hungry, but we move, always moving. If you send anything, send warmth." That line burned itself into John's thoughts. He started looking at honey differently. It wasn't just food. It was thick, slow-burning energy. It was waterproof, sticky, long-lasting. It could coat, preserve, bind. One evening, while fixing a sticky barn door hinge, he dipped a rag in a mixture of old honey and linseed oil and rubbed it into the rusted joint. The squeal stopped instantly. The next morning, a truck from the Des Moines depot arrived early. The corporal looked exhausted. "Last night we lost 6 trucks in Normandy," he said, accidentally letting the location slip. Machine noise, smell of oil. Krauts heard them coming miles off. Something clicked in John's mind. He leaned forward. "I've got something. A compound. Made it myself. It quiets hinges, covers odor. Just honey, beeswax, and linseed oil." The corporal stared at him. "You want us to smear bee spit on army trucks?" John didn't flinch. "Might save 6 trucks next time." The corporal laughed hard, then paused. "Fine. 1 crate. I'll take it to the boys at Fort Riley, see what they say." Days passed, then weeks. No word. John went back to his hives, watching bees dance in tight spirals above the frames. Everything about them was silent precision. No waste, no ego, just function. Bees had been practicing stealth warfare long before humans figured it out. Then on May 12th, a black military sedan pulled into his yard. 2 men stepped out. "We heard you've been mixing some things," one said. "We ran a field test," the other added. "On 3 trucks. Coated the axles, doors, and exhaust hoods with your compound." John barely breathed. "And?" They ran silent, smelled like a bakery, but ran quiet. Krauts didn't hear them until they were already behind the ridge. The man handed John a paper. "Effective immediately, you're authorized to produce 100 gallons of compound per month. Code name, Sweet Silence." John blinked. "Excuse me?" "Sweet Silence," the officer repeated. "Welcome to the war, Mr. Carson." By late May, John was no longer just shipping honey. He was making war compound, 1 barrel at a time. His workshop transformed into a crude production line. Buckets of raw honey stood beside vats of melted beeswax and drums of linseed oil. The air was thick, sweet, almost nauseating. Every surface glistened. Each week, a military truck arrived from Fort Riley to collect the compound, now labeled SSC-7, short for Sweet Silence Compound Number 7. The containers bore no other markings. In the second week of June, a letter arrived from Sergeant Benjamin Gentry, 59th Logistics Division, European Theater of Operations. "Your stuff works. Coated 5 vehicles last week. Germans didn't hear us coming. Got the drop on them outside Carentan. 2 enemy trucks destroyed. 0 American casualties. Smelled like Christmas. Keep it coming." John read the note twice, then placed it inside a mason jar on his shelf like a medal made of words. He started experimenting, adjusting ratios. While applying a thicker batch to an old flatbed axle, he noticed something extraordinary. The waxy layer not only reduced squeals, but insulated the wheel from vibration. It didn't just muffle sound, it muffled detection. In World War II, where entire columns of trucks could be located by airborne acoustic sensors, vibration mattered desperately. He sent a note back. "Compound now acts as vibration dampener on metal surfaces. Try under vehicle hoods, side doors, exhaust seams. Also repels water." A week later, a typed reply arrived. "Tested your modifications on 8 Jeeps moving through hedgerows near St. Lo. Dampening reduced acoustic detection range by an estimated 25%. Bravo. Enclosing authorization for increase to 200 gallons per month. Prepare to ship to Port of Liverpool for pre-invasion outfitting. Liverpool. Invasion. The pieces clicked into place. His compound wasn't just for patrols. It was part of something massive. On June 3rd, a courier truck arrived with crates and urgent instructions. Prepare 10 barrels for transatlantic shipment. Label, Class A, engineering materials. Destination, confidential. That night, as John sealed the last barrel, he looked out over darkened fields. His bees were silent in their hives. No wind, no stars, just the low, thudding echo of thunder to the west. Not a storm, but something heavier. Those barrels would land in Normandy within 10 days. Normandy, June 12, 1944. 6 days after D-Day. In the chaos of the French countryside, American truck convoys rumbled down cratered roads under cover of darkness. German ambushes came fast and without warning. But something was different this time. According to Captain Lawrence Mendel, 3rd Armored Division, a series of modified trucks had moved silently through an area near Sainte-Mère-Église, past what scouts called a kill zone. We were ghosts, Mendel would later write. They expected engines and rattles. Instead, we gave them silence and molasses. Field mechanics called it bee grease. Infantry called it ghost syrup. But whatever the nickname, it worked. Back in Iowa, John kept producing, kept melting, kept stirring. His hands blistered from hot wax. His arms ached from hauling barrels. But he didn't stop. Then on June 22nd, a military courier arrived with something unusual. A manila envelope containing a photograph. Black and white, grainy, torn along the edges. It showed an American convoy of 6 trucks parked safely behind hedgerows near Carentan. One soldier crouched beside a wheel, holding a brush and tin. Written in pencil on the back, "Your stuff, it saved us." That photo hit John harder than any letter. His work was no longer just local labor. It was now baked into the machinery of liberation. By July, the Army's Logistics Command authorized expansion of Sweet Silence to a full dozen engineering units. Over 400 gallons per week were being shipped overseas. British and Canadian forces began requesting the compound for their nighttime raids. The secret held. Germans noticed fewer sounds, fewer mechanical signatures. They blamed terrain, wind, weather. They didn't know that a farmer in Iowa had invented a stealth technology using nothing but nature. August 20th, 1944. The Falaise Gap, northern France. Nearly 50,000 German soldiers were trapped between 2 converging Allied armies. If they could be sealed in, the German line in France would collapse. If they escaped, the war would stretch on for months. The Gap, just a 20-kilometer corridor of broken farmland and muddy roads, became a battlefield of desperation. American General Omar Bradley needed supplies to move faster than the enemy. Fuel, ammunition, rations, radios, everything. Enter Convoy Echo 9. 212 trucks, 38 jeeps, 12 half-tracks, all loaded to capacity and scheduled to cross into the Falaise region under cover of night using unpaved farm roads, bridges barely wide enough for tractors. At 1900 hours, just before sunset, the motor pool commander made an absurd call. Apply the Carson compound, full coverage. 3 dozen mechanics sprang into action. Barrels marked SSC-7 were rolled out. The honey-based compound, sticky, heavy, black gold in color, was brushed onto door hinges, axle joints, hood seals, and tailgate locks. The air smelled like burnt sugar and linseed smoke. Inside one of the trucks sat Sergeant Mark Carson, 1st Armored Division, John's brother. He had no idea the compound being painted onto his truck came from the same hands that had pulled him out of mud holes as a kid in Iowa. By 22:30 hours, the convoy was ready. Engines turned over with soft purrs. No revving, no clanking gear changes, just motion. The darkness was absolute. Headlights banned, radio silence enforced. As the convoy moved, it passed within 1,000 meters, just over half a mile, of a German mortar unit hidden in the hedgerows near Trun. Scouts later confirmed the Germans never reacted. No shells fired. No spotlights triggered. They didn't know the Americans were there. But silence wasn't invincibility. 10 miles into the route, as trucks crossed a makeshift wooden bridge over the Dives River, a German reconnaissance patrol spotted movement. One flare went up, white, then red. Then came gunfire. The convoy split, half pushed forward. The rest peeled off into a ravine, trying to outflank the attackers. Inside one lead vehicle, Sergeant Mark Carson manned a Browning .30 caliber machine gun. "They see us now," he shouted over the radio. "Move!" But the surprise had bought precious seconds, because the first 5 minutes of silence had gotten them farther than expected, just far enough to bypass the worst of the German kill zone. German shells screamed overhead but struck only the tail end of the formation. 3 trucks hit, 8 men wounded, none killed. The rest, 198 vehicles, made it through. Over 100 tons of ammunition, 5,000 gallons of fuel, 2 entire field hospitals packed in crates. They arrived in time to reinforce the Canadian First Army, who slammed the door shut on the Falaise Gap the following morning. That night, exhausted soldiers set up triage tents in silence. Someone lit a cigarette. The medic beside him said, "Careful, this is a sugar field. You'll catch fire." They laughed, first laugh in days. The name Carson Compound began circulating in official reports. Even General George Patton mentioned it in passing during a debrief. Whatever voodoo they're putting on those trucks, keep doing it. But the real moment came from a letter. A week later, John Carson received a battered envelope with foreign stamps. Inside, a torn piece of canvas from a military tent and a scribbled note. "They used your stuff on our truck. We rolled quiet, even under fire. I shot back and lived. Some didn't, but most of us made it. Mark." John stood in his kitchen for nearly an hour, staring at the note. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just nodded. Then he walked outside to the hives, opened one carefully, and whispered, "You did good, girls." The war didn't end in Normandy. It thundered eastward across France, into Belgium, through the frozen forests of the Ardennes, and finally into the shattered streets of Berlin. But for John Winslow Carson, his war ended on a quiet September morning in 1944 when the trucks stopped coming. No letter, no explanation, just silence. The barrels were stacked, the compound ready, but the army never returned to collect. John knew what it meant. His job was done. By winter of 1944, Allied forces had broken German defensive lines. New compounds and technologies were being developed in government labs with budgets 1,000 times what John had. There was no more need for a beekeeper's trick. But that didn't mean it hadn't mattered. In a post-war report by the United States Army Quartermaster Corps, buried between statistics about truck tires and engine oil, there's one line. Temporary vehicle coating, designated SSC-7, demonstrated minor but measurable improvement in stealth movement under limited field conditions. Source: civilian supplier, Iowa. No medal, no citation. Just one sentence in a government document no one would read. But that was fine with John. He had never done it for glory. In the spring of 1945, as victory celebrations filled American cities with ticker tape and brass bands, John returned to what he'd always done. He repaired tractors, he repainted the barn, he split his hives in preparation for a heavy clover bloom. When Mark finally returned home, thinner, quieter, with shadows behind his eyes, they said almost nothing about the war. Just sat on the porch, drinking coffee, watching bees. Mark said once, after a long silence, "I heard they tested your stuff on the Navy, too." John smirked. "Well, hell, maybe I sank a U-boat." They laughed for real this time. Years passed. The compound was never made again. The formula lived only in John's head, a mix of instinct, trial and error, and the smell of Iowa summers. In 1953, a government inspector visited during a census survey. At the end of a long form, he asked, "Did your operation contribute to the war effort?" John paused. "In a way. I kept some folks alive." "You grew food?" "No," John answered. "I made them harder to hear." The inspector didn't write that down. By the 1960s, the barn was falling in on itself. The compound barrels rusted and empty. But the bees still worked, their drones unchanged, their methods still perfect. John passed in 1971 at the age of 63. His obituary ran 4 lines in the Harland County Register. John W. Carson, lifelong farmer and beekeeper, died Sunday at home, survived by his brother Mark. Known locally for his honey. No mention of Normandy, no mention of trucks, but on his property, beneath a rusted gate, a child decades later would find a strange metal box with a cracked jar inside. Inside the jar, a folded note, stiff with age. It read, "Sweet silence, remember us." It's easy to think that history is made by generals and tanks, by grand strategies, famous speeches, and battles with names etched into monuments. But sometimes it's made by something humbler. A man alone in a barn, a swarm of bees, a sticky golden substance never meant for war. John Carson never stormed a beach. He never fired a shot. But his honey, his so-called stupid trick, rolled through the mud of Normandy. It crossed bridges under fire. It clung to the axles of trucks carrying wounded boys home. And it did something that almost nothing else in war ever does. It saved lives without taking any. There's something profoundly American, profoundly human in that idea, that in the middle of the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen, one man, using the most ancient and natural resource on earth, could tip the balance, not with violence, but with ingenuity. A jar of honey became a weapon of silence, and for just a moment, silence was victory. So here's the question worth asking. How many other small contributions have we forgotten? How many wars were nudged, not by bullets, but by ideas? How many quiet heroes worked in barns instead of battlefields, changing history one sticky, golden barrel at a time? Sometimes the sweetest part of history is the part we almost missed.